I am Julian, 32 years old. After 4 years of letting my brother-in-law treat my home like a free resort, I returned from a quiet camping trip to find my $40,000 backyard sanctuary completely shredded, drained, and destroyed. I stood there in the dead of night, staring at the ruined vinyl liner of my pool while my own wife sobbed, not for the destruction of our property, but because she wanted to protect the man who did it. While I was staring at the damages that would eventually trigger a massive lawsuit, my father-in-law was likely sitting in his financed Porsche, laughing about how he had finally put me in my place. They treated me like a walking ATM, a silent provider who was supposed to just smile and fund their delusions of grandeur. They mocked my state salary. They laughed in my face in front of the entire family. But there was one thing they did not know. They did not know that for the past 6 months, in my capacity as a senior financial fraud investigator for the state, I had been building a federal money laundering case. And my arrogant brother-in-law had just left a paper trail linking himself directly to my primary target. Right now, as I tell you this, they are bankrupt, facing indictments, and begging for a mercy I absolutely refuse to give. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their entire lives piece by piece, please hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section. Now, let us go back to the moment the war officially started. It was late on a Thursday evening in July. The heavy summer heat was still clinging to the suburban streets as our Uber pulled into the driveway. My wife, Rebecca, and I had just flown back from a 5-day camping trip in Yellowstone. The neighborhood was dead quiet. The streetlights cast a dim, orange glow over the manicured lawns. From the outside, our house looked perfectly normal. It looked like the peaceful, successful real estate investment I had poured my life savings into. I dragged our heavy duffel bags out of the trunk, tipped the driver, and unlocked the front door. I dropped the bags in the front hallway, stretched my aching back, and let out a long breath. All I wanted was to step out onto the back patio, turn on the underwater LED lights of my pool, and listen to the gentle hum of the water filter. I walked through the dark kitchen, my boots echoing on the hardwood floor, and pushed open the heavy glass sliding door leading to the backyard. I flipped the switch for the massive overhead floodlights. The brilliant white light illuminated the yard, and my heart physically stopped beating for a second. The water was gone, all 41,000 gallons of it. I stepped onto the stamped concrete patio, my mind entirely unable to process the absolute devastation in front of me. The custom-fitted, deep blue vinyl liner that I had paid top dollar for was shredded. Huge, jagged tears ran down the sidewalls, exposing the raw, damp earth and the gray concrete shell underneath. The heavy cedar planters that lined the deck had been violently kicked over. Black potting soil and crushed red geraniums were smeared across the pristine deck. At the bottom of the empty deep end, resting in a pathetic puddle of brown sludge, was my expensive automatic pool vacuum. It had been smashed into 3 distinct pieces with what looked like a sledgehammer. The internal motors were exposed, wires hanging out like broken ribs. I did not scream. I did not fall to my knees. The training I rely on during tense financial interrogations kicked in immediately. I felt a cold, hyper-focused numbness wash over me. I walked slowly toward the glass patio table. Placed dead center on the glass was a heavy rock. Pinned beneath the rock was a piece of white cardstock. I pulled the note free. The handwriting was jagged, messy, and arrogant. I knew immediately that it belonged to my brother-in-law, Derek. The note read perfectly clearly. Julian, pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech. You want to use people and never give anything back? Well, now you know how it feels to have something you care about taken away. Do not bother calling me. I am done pretending to like you, Derek. P.S. The pool pump accidentally got unplugged while the kids were playing. Oops. I read the words 3 times. A worthless leech. He actually wrote those words. This was a 35-year-old man who had treated my property like his personal country club for 4 consecutive summers without ever paying for a single hot dog, let alone a drop of electricity. Rebecca walked out onto the patio behind me. I heard her gasp. I heard the thud of her purse hitting the concrete. She clamped her hands over her mouth, letting out a series of high-pitched, panicked whimpers. She looked at the empty crater in our yard, then looked at me. "Julian," she trembled, her eyes wide with terror. "Oh my God. Call him. Call Derek right now. He needs to explain this. I cannot believe he would do this." I folded the piece of cardstock perfectly in half, then into quarters, and slid it into the front pocket of my jacket. I felt the sharp edges of the paper against my chest. It was a signed confession to a major felony, and I was going to guard it with my life. "I am not calling your brother," I said. My voice did not even sound like my own. It was completely hollow. It was the voice of a stranger. Rebecca grabbed my arm, her panic rapidly turning into a shrill, hysterical defense mechanism. "What do you mean you are not calling him? Look at our yard. He ruined everything. You need to scream at him. You need to call my parents. We have to fix this before it gets out of hand." I turned slowly and looked my wife directly in the eyes. We had been married for 8 years. For 8 years I had swallowed my pride. I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace with her incredibly toxic family. I had paid the dinner bills when her father conveniently forgot his wallet. I had let her brother park his leaking, muddy truck on my clean driveway. I had endured their thinly veiled insults about my career. And looking at her now, watching her primary instinct shift toward protecting her family rather than defending our home, the well of patience I had drawn from for nearly a decade simply dried up. "I am not calling him," I repeated softly. "And you will not call him either. You will not call your mother. You will not call your father. If you pick up your phone to warn your family right now, Rebecca, we are getting a divorce tomorrow morning." She flinched violently, stepping back as if I had slapped her across the face. "Then what are you going to do?" I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart. "I am calling the police. And then, I am going to destroy him." 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into my driveway, its flashing red and blue lights casting an eerie, rhythmic glow across the neighborhood. Officer Hayes, a veteran cop with graying hair and a heavy utility belt, walked into the backyard. He took one look at the shredded liner and let out a low, long whistle. He told me this was a clear case of felony vandalism and intentional destruction of property. I handed him the note. He read it, bagged it for evidence, and gave me a case number. As the police car drove away into the night, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own backyard, I realized that the destruction of this pool was not a sudden act of anger. It was the culmination of years of deep, unchecked disrespect. To understand exactly why I decided to unleash hell on my in-laws, you need to understand what happened over the last 4 years. 4 years ago, this house was just a piece of real estate with a big, empty, flat backyard composed entirely of stubborn weeds and dry dirt. But I had a vision. I work as a senior financial fraud investigator for the State Department of Revenue. It is a job that demands intense, unrelenting mental focus. I spend my days sifting through hundreds of pages of corporate tax filings, bank statements, and ledger entries, hunting for discrepancies. I deal with liars, fraudsters, and tense legal interrogations on a daily basis. When I come home, I do not want noise. I do not want chaos. I want peace. I wanted a sanctuary. I saved diligently for 3 years to build that sanctuary. I did not buy a flashy car. I did not take expensive vacations. I packed my lunch every single day. I used my latest promotion bonus to fund the landscaping. When I finally signed the contract with the pool installation company, it was one of the proudest moments of my adult life. I spent $40,000 on a beautiful, custom-designed in-ground pool. It featured a deep blue liner that made the water look like an ocean, a stamped concrete deck designed to mimic natural slate, and underwater lighting that made the whole backyard glow. The first month we had it, it was pure heaven. I would come home from a grueling day dealing with hostile lawyers, step into the cool water, and feel the immense stress wash right off my shoulders. It was my reward for playing by the rules and working hard. But my peace was stolen almost immediately. Derek is 3 years older than me, but he operates with the emotional maturity of an entitled, spoiled teenager. He bounces from job to job, always chasing some ridiculous get-rich-quick scheme, always talking about a massive deal that is supposedly just around the corner. He lived in a cramped two-bedroom apartment downtown with his wife and their two young kids, Dylan and Mason. The very first weekend after the pool was finished, Derek showed up completely unannounced. He did not knock on the front door. He just walked right through the side gate, carrying a cheap plastic cooler, trailed by his two kids who were already wearing their swimsuits. "Hey man," Derek yelled, dropping his dripping cooler right onto my pristine new deck. "Heard the rich guy finally got his pond finished. Figured we would come break it in." I was sitting in a lounge chair reading a book. I looked up, completely surprised and immediately annoyed by the intrusion. But Rebecca hurried out the back door, her face lighting up at the sight of her nephews. She immediately started handing out fresh towels. "Derek, you did not tell us you were coming," Rebecca said softly. "Family does not need an invitation, right, Julian?" Derek smirked at me, popping the top off a cheap beer he had pulled from his cooler. He did not offer me one. I forced a tight smile. "Right, just make sure the kids do not run on the wet concrete." That was my first fatal mistake. Giving an inch to a man who takes a mile. That single unannounced visit set the firm precedent for the next 4 years. My backyard ceased to be my sanctuary. It became Derek's personal summer resort. He never asked if it was a good time. He would simply send a text to Rebecca on Friday afternoon. It was never a request. It was a demand. "Pool party tomorrow at 1. Dylan is bringing 3 friends. Make sure the filter is running." He treated us like the hired help. He would show up with a horde of loud, screaming children. He would commandeer my expensive gas grill, burning cheap hot dogs and leaving the grates coated in thick black grease for me to scrub the next morning. He would blast his terrible music from a Bluetooth speaker, completely ignoring the fact that I was inside trying to enjoy my weekend. When the sun went down and Derek finally decided he had extracted enough free entertainment for the day, he would pack up his cooler and leave. He never once offered to clean up. My yard would be littered with wet, sour-smelling towels, empty soda cans, and cheap plastic water guns. Whenever I confronted Rebecca about it, asking her to set basic boundaries, she would deploy the ultimate toxic weapon: guilt. She would tell me the kids did not have a yard at their apartment. She would tell me it was just a few months a year. She begged me not to make a fuss because she was terrified of the backlash from her father. Dealing with Derek was exhausting, but dealing with my father-in-law, Richard, was utterly suffocating. Richard was a retired car salesman who believed a man's worth was measured entirely by how loudly he bragged and what he drove. Richard leased a high-end Porsche, a car he could barely afford, just to project an image of extreme wealth. He ruled his family through financial manipulation and aggressive bullying. He constantly dangled the promise of a massive future inheritance over everyone's heads, demanding absolute obedience in exchange for the vague promise of money down the line. My mother-in-law, Brenda, was the ultimate enabler. She protected Derek from any criticism with a shield of aggressive guilt trips, claiming he was just finding his way. The boiling point arrived during a mandatory Sunday dinner at Richard and Brenda's house, 2 weeks after I had firmly told Rebecca that Derek needed to stop bringing half the neighborhood to my house. I sat at the dining room table, quietly cutting my steak, while Derek held court, loudly recounting a story about some middle manager he had cursed out at his latest logistics job. "Good for you, son," Richard boomed from the head of the table, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "You do not let anyone disrespect you. A man has to demand what he is worth." Derek smirked, locking eyes with me across the table. "Exactly. Some guys just let people walk all over them because they are too scared to make waves. Right, Julian?" I set my knife down carefully, the metal clinking against the porcelain plate. "I think there is a big difference between making waves and just being deeply unprofessional, Derek." The dining room went dead silent. Brenda gasped softly, dropping her fork. Richard's face darkened instantly, a thick vein pulsing in his neck. "Unprofessional," Richard scoffed, pointing his butter knife directly at my chest. Listen here, Julian. You sit in a little cubicle all day pushing papers for a state salary. You do not know the first thing about the real business world. Derek is a hustler. He is out there making things happen. He is making a mess in my backyard every single weekend. I shot back, the years of frustration finally boiling over. I looked directly at Brenda. He brings half the neighborhood to my house, leaves garbage everywhere, and expects me to clean it up. I want it to stop. Brenda looked at me as if I had just spit on the floor. Julian, how can you be so incredibly selfish? You have that huge, beautiful house. You have that fancy pool. You have no children of your own to provide for. Derek is struggling. The least you can do is share what you have with your own blood. I am not his blood, I said coldly. And I am not his free babysitter. You are family, Richard roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the wine glasses rattled. Family shares. You think because you make a decent government paycheck you are better than us? You do not know what it takes to be a real provider. Derek is struggling to put food on the table, and you are crying about a few wet towels? Grow up, Julian. Stop acting like a spoiled brat. I turned my head and looked at Rebecca. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say, "Actually, Dad, Julian works very hard, and Derek is wildly disrespectful." I waited for my wife to be my partner. Rebecca looked down at her lap, her face flushed crimson red. She picked at her cloth napkin and said absolutely nothing. The silence stung worse than Richard's insults. Derek sat across from me, a smug, triumphant grin plastered across his face. He knew he had won. He knew the family dynamic protected his bad behavior absolutely. "Do not worry about it, Dad," Derek said, taking a loud, obnoxious gulp of his beer. "Julian is just tight with his stuff. He does not get what it means to be a real man. I will make sure to bring my own trash bags next time so the princess does not have to clean up." I stood up, threw my napkin onto the table, and walked out the front door. Rebecca followed me 5 minutes later, apologizing profusely the entire ride home, begging me to understand that her parents were just old school. But the damage was permanently done. I realized that day that I was completely alone in my own marriage. For the next 2 years, I retreated. I worked longer hours. When Derek brought his circus to my house on Saturdays, I stayed locked in my home office with noise-canceling headphones. I stopped arguing because arguing was pointless. I let the resentment build layer by layer, compacting in the dark until it was hard as stone. Then came July of this year, the breaking point. I was desperate for a break. The relentless summer heat, the intense stress of a massive corporate fraud case I was building at work, and the suffocating presence of my in-laws every single weekend had pushed me to the absolute edge of severe burnout. I needed to get away from the city, away from my phone, and most importantly, away from Derek. I booked a 5-day camping trip to Yellowstone National Park for Rebecca and me. It was going to be our first real vacation in 2 years. I mapped out the hiking trails, reserved a secluded campsite, and bought the plane tickets. The only thing we were missing was a high-quality camping tent. I knew Derek had one. 2 years prior, during one of his brief obsessions with the idea of outdoor living, he had dropped $400 on a top-of-the-line, 4-person, all-weather camping tent. He had taken his family camping exactly once, complained about the bugs the entire time, and the tent had been gathering dust in his apartment closet ever since. Derek should have put that $400 into a college fund for Dylan and Mason, but he was always obsessed with buying expensive gear to look the part. "Just ask him to borrow it," Rebecca suggested one evening as we were packing our gear in the living room. "He has not used it in years, and after all the times he has used our pool, he owes us a favor." It made logical sense. A simple favor between family members. I did not want to call him, but spending another $400 on a heavy-duty tent we might only use once seemed foolish. I picked up my phone and dialed Derek's number. He answered on the 4th ring, loud music thumping in the background. "What is up? Make it quick. I am busy," Derek answered curtly. "Hey Derek, listen, Rebecca and I are heading out to Yellowstone next week for some camping. I remembered you had that big 4-person tent you bought a couple of years ago. We were wondering if we could borrow it for 5 days. I will make sure it is completely cleaned and aired out before I return it." There was a heavy pause on the line. The music in the background was muted, as if he had walked into another room. When he finally spoke, his voice was dripping with absolute disdain. "Are you serious right now?" he sneered. I frowned, confused by the sudden, sharp hostility. "Yeah, I am serious. We just need it for a few days. You want to borrow my expensive camping gear? Do you have any idea how much that tent cost me, Julian? It was $400. That is professional equipment. I know exactly what it cost, Derek, and we will take perfect care of it. If anything happens to it, I will buy you a brand new one." "No," Derek barked. "The answer is no. Honestly, Julian, you have a massive house, a $40,000 pool, a cushy state job, and you are calling me begging for camping gear? Get your own damn stuff. You are pathetic." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned stark white. "Pathetic? Derek, you have been using my pool, my grill, and my backyard every single weekend for 4 summers. You do not pay for anything. You leave a mess every single time. And you are calling me pathetic for asking to borrow a tent you do not even use. A pool just sits there," Derek yelled, his voice rising in defensive anger. "It is not like you are actually giving me anything. It is just water in a hole. My tent is valuable property. Could get ripped. Could get stolen. I am not running a charity for tight-fisted bureaucrats. Buy your own tent." Before I could say another word, the line went dead. He hung up on me. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at my phone, the blood roaring in my ears. The sheer, blinding hypocrisy of his words felt like a physical blow to the chest. A pool just sits there. Rebecca walked into the room, carrying a stack of thick hiking socks. "What did he say? Is he going to drop it off? Or do we need to go pick it up?" "He said no," I gritted out, tossing my phone onto the sofa. "He said I was pathetic for asking. He said a pool is just water in a hole, and his tent is valuable property." Rebecca stopped walking, holding the socks tightly to her chest. She looked highly uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I waited for her to express outrage. I waited for her to pick up her phone and demand her brother apologize for insulting her husband. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh. "Well, Julian, you do make a lot more money than he does. It probably made him feel insecure that you were asking him for something. You know how prideful he is. We should just go buy our own." I stared at her, completely appalled. "He insulted me, Rebecca. After everything we have given him, he treated me like absolute garbage. Stop making a big deal out of nothing." Rebecca snapped, her patience suddenly evaporating. "You always do this. You hold a grudge over the smallest things. Stop being such a mooch and just go to the sporting goods store. I am sick of being caught in the middle of you two. Stop being such a mooch." My own wife, the woman I had sworn to protect, the woman I had built this life for, had just looked me dead in the eye and called me a mooch for asking to borrow a tent from a man who spent every weekend freeloading off my hard work. I did not yell. I did not throw a plate against the wall. I just felt a cold, dark curtain drop permanently between us. I looked at Rebecca, truly looked at her, and realized she was not my partner. She was merely an extension of Richard, Brenda, and Derek. "I will go buy the tent," I said quietly. I drove to the sporting goods store in complete silence. As I stood at the checkout register, swiping my card for a new $400 tent, a sharp, investigative thought struck me. Derek was perpetually broke. He was always dodging phone calls from collection agencies. How had he afforded a $400 tent 2 years ago when he could not even afford to fix the brakes on his truck? When I got back home, Rebecca was in the shower. I walked straight into the home office and opened the locking filing cabinet where we kept our physical financial records. As a fraud investigator, my brain is permanently wired to look for financial anomalies. I pulled the credit card statements from 2 summers ago. I scanned the dense lines of charges, running my finger down the paper. And there it was. A $435.50 charge at an outdoor sporting goods store on Rebecca's personal credit card. I pulled out my laptop, booted it up, and logged into our joint banking portal, tracing the payments backwards. Rebecca had paid off that specific credit card balance using money transferred directly from our joint checking account. Money that I had deposited from my state salary. I sat back in my leather chair, the air completely leaving my lungs. The tent was not Derek's. He had not paid a single dime for it. When Rebecca came out of the bathroom, wearing a bathrobe and drying her hair with a towel, I was standing in the center of the bedroom holding the paper statement. "You bought the tent," I said. It was not a question. Rebecca froze instantly, the towel pausing in her damp hair. Her eyes darted to the paper in my hand, and the color drained from her face. "Julian, I can." "You bought the tent 2 years ago," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "With my money. Why does Derek have it?" "Dad asked me to," she blurted out, her voice suddenly frantic. Dad's credit card was maxed out, and Derek really wanted to take the kids camping to prove he was a good dad. Dad asked me to just put it on my card, and he promised he would pay me back. He swore he would. "Did he pay you back, Rebecca?" She looked at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "No, but it is family, Julian. I could not say no to my dad. So, let me get this perfectly straight," I said, enunciating every single word. "Your father manipulated you into buying a $400 tent for your brother. You used my money to pay for it. And when I asked to borrow the tent that I essentially paid for, your brother called me pathetic, and you called me a mooch." Rebecca started to cry. Large, dramatic tears rolled down her cheeks. "I did not want to start a massive fight. If I told you the truth, you would have been so mad at my dad. I was just trying to keep the peace." "You did not keep the peace, Rebecca," I said, tossing the paper statement onto the bed. "You just chose a side. And it was not mine." I packed my bags for Yellowstone feeling like an absolute stranger in my own home. The next morning, as we were loading the SUV to drive to the airport, my phone rang. It was Richard. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone so Rebecca could hear every word. "Julian," Richard's loud, booming voice echoed in the garage. "Brenda tells me you were harassing Derek about his camping gear last night." "I asked to borrow a tent, Richard," I said flatly. "Well, beggars cannot be choosers." Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that scraped against my nerves. "You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, son. Derek works hard for what he has. He takes pride in ownership. You should not be trying to leech off his success. Have a good trip. Try not to beg any park rangers for free food." He hung up. I looked at Rebecca. She kept her head down, slamming the trunk shut. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I did not know it then, but leaving the house that day was the catalyst for the greatest destruction and the greatest rebuilding of my entire life. The trip to Yellowstone was miserable. We hiked through beautiful pine forests and watched geysers erupt into clear blue skies, but mentally, I was trapped. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was the credit card statement. I decided right then that when we got back, I was filing for divorce. But I had vastly underestimated Derek's malice. Because when we got back, I found my pool destroyed. After the police left the house that Thursday night, I did not sleep a single wink. I sat at my kitchen island, drinking black coffee, staring at the case number written on the police card. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I was standing in the backyard with Marcus. Marcus was the master contractor who owned the company that had installed the pool. He was a seasoned guy who had been in the business for 30 years. He wore thick work boots and a faded baseball cap, and he did not say a single word for 5 full minutes as he walked the perimeter of the destruction. He climbed down into the empty deep end, inspecting the jagged tears in the heavy blue vinyl. He knelt by the pump station, examining the exposed wires and the open drainage valves. When he finally climbed back out, his face was extremely grim. "Julian," Marcus said, pulling off his cap and scratching his head, "I have seen pools damaged by severe storms. I have seen them ruined by years of neglect. I have never seen a pool assassinated like this. How bad is it? I asked, my voice steady despite the intense nausea churning in my stomach. It is a total loss on the liner, Marcus explained, pointing down into the hole. Whoever did this did not just poke a hole. They took a heavy blade, probably a box cutter or a hunting knife, and dragged it along the sidewalls in 4 different places. Once the water started draining, the pressure change ripped it even further. The automatic vacuum is smashed to hell. It looks like they threw your heavy patio chairs directly onto it. And the pump? They bypassed the safety fail-safes. They unplugged the main circulation pump, opened the primary waste valve, and just let it bleed out into the storm drain system behind your fence. It probably took 2 full days to drain completely. Marcus pulled out a clipboard and started scribbling numbers. You need a completely new custom liner. The concrete shell needs to be acid washed and resealed because it has been exposed to the air and dirt. You need a new vacuum, new filters, and the underground PVC plumbing needs to be pressure tested. $28,000, Julian. And that is a very conservative estimate. I'm sorry, man. This is purely malicious. Someone hates your guts. $28,000. It was not just the money. It was the intense violation. Derek had walked onto my property, stood on the deck I paid for, and systematically destroyed the thing that brought me the most peace. All because I asked to borrow a tent. Write up an official invoice, Marcus. I told him, folding my arms. Include a sworn statement outlining exactly how the damage was caused intentionally. I am going to need it for the insurance company and for the lawyers. While I was outside with Marcus, I needed to gather more evidence inside. I walked through the house, checking every room to ensure Derek had not managed to get inside. The house was secure, but when I walked into the sunroom that overlooked the patio, I noticed something distinctly out of place. Tucked underneath a decorative pillow on the wicker sofa was a small, spiral-bound notebook. It had a bright pink cover. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Rebecca. She used it to keep track of her gardening schedule and household errands. I picked it up and flipped it open. The first few pages were normal grocery lists, but as I flipped toward the middle, the handwriting changed. It was not Rebecca's neat cursive. It was Derek's messy, jagged scrawl. He must have found it in the kitchen during one of his parties and used it because he forgot his own paper. I stared at the page, my eyes scanning the columns of names and numbers. July 12th. Dylan's VIP birthday bash. Jackson, $50, paid Venmo. Liam, $50, paid cash. Sophia, $50, pending. The list went on. There were 20 names. Below that, another page. July 19th. Summer kickoff party. 15 kids at $50. Total $750. Expenses. Hot dogs $30, soda $20. Net profit. $700. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. The air in the sunroom suddenly felt incredibly thick. Derek was not just bringing his kids over to swim. He was running an unpermitted, unlicensed commercial business out of my backyard. He was hosting massive parties for other people's children and charging their parents $50 a head to use my pool, my water, my electricity, and my grill. He was pocketing hundreds of dollars every single weekend, all while drinking my beer and leaving the garbage for me to clean up. And the ledger was sitting inside my wife's notebook. I marched out of the sunroom, the pink notebook gripped tight in my fist. I threw it onto the kitchen counter right in front of Rebecca. She looked at the numbers, and she looked like she was going to be physically sick. She confessed she had caught him doing it last August, but he had begged her to keep it a secret because he was behind on rent. She risked our entire homeowner's liability, our entire financial future, so her deadbeat brother could make a quick buck. I did not yell. I just looked at her. I am sleeping in the guest room. Tomorrow I am changing the locks. If your brother steps foot on this property, he will be arrested for trespassing. The next morning, I took the day off work. I drove downtown and walked into the polished mahogany conference room of my lawyer, Victor. Victor was a sharp, aggressive attorney. I slid the police report, Marcus's $28,000 estimate, Derek's handwritten note, and photographs of the pink notebook across the table. Victor read the note and actually laughed. Please tell me he actually left this at the scene of the crime. Pinned under a rock, I confirmed. He is an absolute idiot. Victor smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. We are not just filing a civil suit. We are going to let the monsters handle him. Step 1, you file a claim with your homeowner's insurance today. It is an open and shut case of malicious mischief by a named third party. Your insurance will pay to fix the pool immediately. Then, through a process called subrogation, their massive legal department will go after Derek for the 28 grand. They will garnish his wages, put a lien on his truck, and ruin his credit score until he pays back every cent. Do it, I said. And what about the business? I suggest you make 2 phone calls this afternoon. Victor pointed to the notebook. One to Gregory, the head of your HOA, and one to Owen down at City Code Enforcement. Operating an unpermitted commercial venue carries massive fines. I spent the afternoon making those calls. Gregory, the HOA president, immediately issued a retroactive fine of $500 per event, totaling $4,000, mailed directly to Derek's apartment. Owen at City Planning opened a code violation case. The civil walls were closing in on Derek rapidly. But I was not done. The civil penalties would make him broke, but they would not destroy him. I wanted to destroy him. That night, I locked myself in my home office and booted up my encrypted state laptop. It was time to look into Derek's Venmo account. And what I found there was going to turn this petty family dispute into a federal nightmare. I sat completely alone in the dim glow of my home office, the house entirely silent except for the faint, rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning unit kicking on and off. Down the hall, Rebecca was asleep in the guest room. She was completely unaware of the absolute storm I was meticulously preparing to bring down on her family. The word divorce had been hanging heavily in the air between us ever since the moment I found out she used my hard-earned salary to secretly fund her brother's camping trip. I cracked my knuckles, the sharp sound echoing in the quiet room, and booted up my encrypted state-issued laptop. Derek thought I was just a lowly paper pusher. He had spent 4 consecutive years mocking my state salary, calling me a tight-fisted bureaucrat who simply did not understand how the real business world operated. He strutted around my real estate, drinking my beer, acting like he was a modern-day titan of industry because he occasionally flipped cheap items online or worked brief stints at logistics warehouses. He had absolutely no idea how dangerous a man with authorized, legitimate access to state financial databases could truly be. As a senior financial fraud investigator, I have legal, documented access to cross-reference public tax records, business registry databases, and open-source financial data for active investigations. I am trained to look at a messy pile of numbers and find the singular thread that unravels an entire criminal enterprise. I was not going to break the law or abuse my power for a personal vendetta, but I was absolutely going to look very closely at the public breadcrumbs Derek had carelessly left behind on the internet. I started my investigation with Venmo. The pink notebook I had discovered hidden in our sunroom clearly showed that Derek received exactly half of his illegal pool party payments via the cash-sharing app. Because Derek was an arrogant, validation-seeking man who loved public attention, his Venmo profile was completely open to the public. He wanted people to see his transactions so he could look like a busy, popular guy. I scrolled back through his transaction history for the last 2 summers, my eyes scanning the endless lines of data. Sure enough, there were dozens upon dozens of payments from various local parents in my neighborhood. The captions attached to the payments were incredibly smug and entirely incriminating. They read Dylan's VIP pool bash, summer camp access fee, and water park weekend at Julian's. But what caught my highly trained eye was not the incoming payments from the neighborhood parents. It was exactly where Derek was sending the money after he collected it. He was not keeping the cash in his personal checking account. He was not putting it into a college fund for his 2 young sons. He was funneling large, even sums of money, $500 here, $1,000 there, sometimes $1,500 after a particularly busy weekend, to a user account registered under the name Apex Solutions LLC. I frowned deeply leaning closer to the glowing monitor. The blue light reflected harshly in the dark office. Why was a chronically broke guy, a man who could not even afford a simple camping tent or a basic brake job for his rusty truck, transferring large, rounded chunks of cash to a limited liability company? I opened the State Business Registry database and ran a comprehensive search for Apex Solutions LLC. The company was registered to a generic P.O. box located in the downtown financial district. It was a classic shell company setup, the kind commonly used in shady real estate transactions to obscure the true owner of a property. I scrolled down to the corporate filings to find the registered agent. The name listed on the official state document was Silas. My blood instantly ran ice cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Silas. I knew that name intimately. I knew his social security number, his known associates, and his preferred methods of operation. Silas was the primary target of a massive, multimillion-dollar federal money laundering and tax evasion investigation that my department had been building for the past 6 months alongside federal prosecutors. Silas ran a sophisticated network of real estate shell companies, using small-time contractors, local street hustlers, and desperate men crippled by debt to wash dirty cash. I pulled up the highly classified active case file from my secure server and began cross-referencing the financial data. The pieces of the puzzle fell together with terrifying, undeniable perfection. Derek was not just throwing illegal pool parties in my backyard to make a few extra bucks for groceries. He was working as a low-level cash mule for Silas. Silas had likely met Derek at one of his brief warehouse jobs and promised him a small cut of the action. Or, more likely given Derek's massive ego and poor financial planning, Silas offered him a secure way to hide his assets from aggressive debt collectors and his ex-wife's lawyer by funneling his money through the LLC. Derek was taking the clean cash he scammed off the neighborhood parents, mixing it with whatever other dirty street money he was moving for Silas, and passing it right up the chain. I sat back in my heavy leather chair, letting out a low, utterly disbelieving laugh. The sheer, staggering irony of it all was almost too much to process. Derek had inadvertently tied his petty, spiteful revenge plot directly into a major state felony investigation. He thought he was swimming with the big fish, playing the impressive role of a successful hustler, but he was just a disposable, clueless pawn in a federal crime ring. If I simply reported his unreported income from the pool parties to the IRS, he would get hit with a nasty tax bill and a standard civil lawsuit. But if I submitted my concrete findings, the Venmo transaction logs, the direct financial connection to Apex Solutions, and the undeniable pattern of structured deposits, to my department director, Derek would not just be facing municipal HOA fines. He would be facing federal indictments for conspiracy to commit money laundering. If Derek went to federal prison, his ex-wife would immediately secure full custody of Dylan and Mason, and his life as he knew it would be effectively over. I had the ultimate kill shot loaded directly in the chamber. I just needed the perfect stage to pull the trigger. I did not want to just send an email to my boss and let the police arrest him quietly on a random Tuesday morning. I wanted him to see the destruction coming. I wanted Richard, the pompous man who had mocked my career and demanded respect simply because he drove a leased Porsche, to watch his golden boy get systematically dismantled by the exact job he had relentlessly ridiculed. I wanted Brenda to see the catastrophic monster she had enabled for 35 years. I picked up my cell phone. It was past midnight, but I knew the man I was calling would still be awake reading in his massive study. I dialed Harrison. Harrison was Rebecca's uncle, Richard's much older brother. He was a retired state court judge. Unlike Richard, Harrison was a man of immense, quiet integrity, genuine power, and absolute zero tolerance for nonsense. He was the only person in the entire family that Richard genuinely feared. The reason was entirely financial. Harrison was the sole executor of the family trust, the massive inheritance Richard was constantly banking on to fund his fake wealthy lifestyle and eventual retirement. Richard treated Harrison with a trembling, desperate respect because Harrison held the keys to the vault. "Julian," Harrison answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly, deep, and perfectly calm. "It is late. Is everything all right with Rebecca?" "Rebecca is physically fine, Harrison," I said steadily. keeping my tone entirely professional. But everything else is not. I need a massive favor from you. I need you to call a mandatory family meeting this Sunday afternoon at your house. A family meeting? Why? Because Derek trespassed on my property, destroyed my $40,000 pool, caused $28,000 in severe property damage, and left a signed note confessing to it. And I am about to completely ruin his life. I want Richard and Brenda to see the hard evidence before the federal agents show up at their front door next week. There was a heavy, profound silence on the line. I could distinctly hear the heavy antique grandfather clock ticking in the background of his study. Then, Harrison let out a long, heavy breath, a sound of deep, ancestral disappointment. Bring your evidence, Julian. Sunday at 2 o'clock. I will make sure they are all sitting in my living room. I hung up the phone. The trap was permanently set. The storm was rapidly approaching, and I was holding all the lightning in the palm of my hand. Sunday morning felt entirely different than any other Sunday in my entire life. The house was extremely quiet, but it was not the heavy, suffocating silence of a broken marriage. It was the sharp, highly focused quiet of a man preparing for a surgical military strike. I woke up early, took a long shower, and put on a crisp, tailored button-down shirt and a dark, professional blazer. I did not dress like I was going to a casual family barbecue. I dressed like I was walking into a federal courtroom to present a capital case. I packed my heavy leather briefcase with meticulous, deliberate care. Inside were the official police report, Marcus's certified repair estimate, the pink notebook with Derek's handwritten ledger, the HOA violation notices, the printed Venmo transaction logs, and the highly classified state tax registry files tying Derek directly to Silas. Every single piece of paper was a heavy iron nail in his coffin. Rebecca stood in the hallway, watching me click the brass locks of the briefcase shut. She looked completely exhausted. She had not slept in days, her eyes ringed with dark circles. "We are really doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I looked at her, my expression completely neutral, betraying absolutely no emotion. "I am doing this. You are coming as a witness. You can either stand by my side and watch the undeniable truth come out, or you can go stand by them. But there is no middle ground anymore, Rebecca. You make your final choice today." She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes, but she did not argue. We walked out to the car and drove to Harrison's estate in complete, heavy silence. I thought about the sheer audacity of my in-laws. I thought about the years of forced smiles, the endless Thanksgiving dinners where I was treated like a second-class citizen in my own family, and the constant disrespect of my property. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Today was the day the bill finally came due. Harrison lived in a sprawling, magnificent stone estate in the wealthiest, most secluded and exclusive suburb of the city. The massive iron gates opened slowly as we approached. As we pulled into the long, sweeping circular driveway, I immediately spotted Richard's leased silver Porsche parked front and center, completely blocking the elegant stone walkway. It was a classic Richard move, forcing everyone else to walk around his fake symbol of wealth. Derek's muddy, oversized, loud pickup truck was parked aggressively on the pristine grass near the side gate, entirely disrespecting Harrison's perfectly manicured landscaping. "They are already here," Rebecca whispered, her hands shaking visibly as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Good," I said, grabbing my heavy leather briefcase from the back seat. "Let us go." We walked up the wide, sweeping stone steps, and Harrison's uniformed housekeeper let us in, taking our coats with a silent nod. We were guided straight into the formal living room. It was an intimidating, cavernous space with high vaulted ceilings, dark, rich mahogany wall paneling, and massive floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with heavy, intimidating legal volumes. It was not a room designed for casual, warm family banter. It was a room specifically designed to make you feel incredibly small and entirely accountable. Derek was sitting comfortably on one of the incredibly expensive leather sofas. His dirty, mud-caked boots were propped right up on the antique mahogany coffee table. He was casually drinking a bottled beer, looking like he owned the place. Richard was standing by the grand, roaring stone fireplace, swirling a glass of very expensive scotch, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Brenda was sitting nervously on the absolute edge of a high-backed wingback chair, frantically twisting her diamond wedding ring around her finger. The exact moment I walked into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted. The air grew instantly thick and heavy. Derek smirked broadly, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his beer. "Well, look who finally decided to show up. The neighborhood mooch. I thought you were too busy crying to the local cops about your precious little pawn to come to Sunday dinner. Did you bring your own hot dogs this time?" I did not say a single word in response. I did not even look at him. I walked straight past him with absolute purpose, heading to the large solid oak dining table at the far edge of the room. I set my leather briefcase down with a solid thud and simply waited, my hands resting on the brass clasps. Richard let out a loud, grating, obnoxious laugh, the ice clinking loudly in his heavy crystal glass. "Julian, Julian, Julian. I heard all about your little temper tantrum with the police. You know, you make a decent salary working for the state, but you have absolutely no idea how true family loyalty works. A real man protects his family. He does not go crying to the authorities just because a pool liner got a tiny little tear in it. You are severely embarrassing yourself, son. You need to learn how to handle things privately." Before I could even formulate a response to his staggering ignorance, the heavy oak doors of the adjoining study opened, and Harrison walked in. He did not look like a warm, welcoming uncle today. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His face was set in deep, severe, unyielding lines. He walked to the absolute center of the room and looked directly at Derek's dirty boots resting comfortably on his extremely expensive furniture. "Get your filthy feet off my table, Derek," Harrison commanded, his voice rumbling through the room like distant, ominous thunder. Derek scrambled backward immediately, nearly dropping his beer, suddenly looking exactly like a terrified, scolded child. "Sorry, Uncle Harrison. I was just getting comfortable." Harrison did not offer anyone a drink. He did not ask how our week was. He did not offer any pleasantries. He simply gestured sharply to the heavy leather chairs arranged in a tight semicircle in front of the fireplace. "Sit down, all of you, right now. We have a very serious legal matter to discuss today, and absolutely nobody is leaving this room until it is fully resolved." The smug, arrogant smiles vanished from Richard and Derek's faces instantly. They sat down quickly, the leather creaking under their weight. The room went dead silent, save for the rhythmic, heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. I stood perfectly still next to Harrison. Rebecca sat as far away from her parents as she possibly could, taking a seat in the corner, her eyes glued firmly to the intricate patterns on the Persian rug. Harrison walked over to the oak table and stood next to my briefcase. I unlatched the brass locks and handed him the first thick manila folder. He opened it slowly, deliberately letting the unbearable suspense stretch out until the air in the room felt entirely unbreathable. He pulled out the official police report and Marcus's $28,000 certified invoice. "Derek," Harrison began, his tone purely judicial, lacking any trace of familial warmth, "I have thoroughly reviewed a police report filed on Thursday night, along with a certified master contractor's repair estimate. It appears you brazenly trespassed onto Julian and Rebecca's property while they were out of town and intentionally destroyed their swimming pool." Derek aggressively rolled his eyes, a rapid nervous twitch starting in his jaw. "Uncle Harrison, it is a huge, blown out of proportion misunderstanding. The kids were playing rough in the yard. Someone must have accidentally kicked the main plug out of the wall. It is just a pool. Julian is just being a massive cheapskate and trying to pin a $28,000 luxury renovation on me because he is mad about a tent." Brenda immediately jumped to her son's defense, her voice high-pitched and whiny. "Harrison, you know exactly how boys are. Julian insulted Derek over a silly camping tent, and now he is trying to completely ruin my son's life over a complete accident. It is purely vindictive. Julian is just holding a grudge." Harrison held up a single, authoritative hand, and Brenda snapped her mouth shut instantly, looking terrified. He reached into the folder and pulled out the piece of heavy white cardstock. Derek's handwritten note. An accident? Harrison repeated flatly, staring directly into Derek's soul. I spent 30 long years on the bench presiding over major criminal cases. I have seen every pathetic, fabricated excuse in the book, but rarely do I see a criminal utterly stupid enough to leave a signed, written confession at the exact scene of a major felony. Harrison read the note aloud. Every single damning word. Julian, pool parties are over. Maybe this will teach you not to be such a worthless leech. You want to use people and never give anything back? Well, now you know how it feels to have something you care about taken away. Do not bother calling me. I am done pretending to like you. Signed, Derek. As Harrison read the vicious words, Richard's face turned a deep, highly concerning shade of crimson. The blood drained from Brenda's face. Even Richard realized how incredibly foolish, arrogant, and legally devastating his golden boy's actions had been. You actually wrote this, Derek? Harrison asked, dropping the note onto the center of the coffee table like a piece of toxic waste. Derek swallowed incredibly hard, his Adam's apple bobbing rapidly in his throat. I was just incredibly mad. Okay? He was disrespecting me on the phone. I just wanted to drain the water to teach him a little lesson. I did not know the heavy liner would rip like that. I am absolutely not paying 28 grand for a stupid, harmless mistake. It is not a mistake. It is felony criminal mischief, Harrison stated coldly. In my courtroom, you would be looking at actual jail time, followed by severe probation. Julian has already legally filed a comprehensive claim with his homeowner's insurance. They are going to repair the pool immediately, and then their massive, incredibly well-funded legal department is going to come after you for the full $28,000. They will aggressively garnish your wages. They will put a heavy lien on your truck. They will ensure you never secure a line of credit again. Dad! Derek panicked, looking desperately at Richard, his voice cracking. Tell him they cannot do this to me. Tell him to stop it. Richard puffed out his chest, desperately trying to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation with his usual loud, aggressive bullying tactics. Now listen here, Harrison. We keep things strictly in the family. Julian needs to call his insurance company and drop this absurd claim right now. We will buy some vinyl patch kits and fix the stupid pool ourselves this weekend. You do not take family to court. It is a massive betrayal. I am not taking him to court, Richard. I finally spoke, stepping forward into the center of the room. My voice was calm, steady, and incredibly loud enough to command the entire space. The insurance company's lawyers are taking him to court. And honestly, Richard, the $28,000 for the ruined pool is the absolute least of Derek's massive problems today. Derek sneered at me, desperately trying to regain his false, fragile bravado. What the hell are you talking about, you paper-pushing loser? You think you scare me with your little civil lawsuit? I am judgment-proof. I do not own anything. I walked back to the oak table and opened my heavy briefcase again. I pulled out Rebecca's pink notebook, the thick stack of printed Venmo transaction logs, and a heavy, sealed manila envelope featuring a prominent red state insignia. I walked back and tossed the pink notebook onto the coffee table, right next to his confession note. Let us talk in detail about the illegal commercial business you have been running on my private property, I said. Derek looked down at the familiar pink notebook, and absolutely all the blood instantly drained from his face. He looked like he had just seen a terrifying ghost. You have been aggressively charging $50 a head to host large parties in my backyard, I continued, pacing slowly and methodically in front of him. You charged admission. You operated an unpermitted commercial recreation facility in a strict residential zone. The Homeowners Association has already formally issued $4,000 in retroactive fines, which are currently being mailed directly to your apartment address. Furthermore, the City Planning Commission has officially opened an active code violation case against you. Brenda gasped loudly, pressing both hands hard to her chest. Derek, you were charging people money to go to your brother-in-law's house. I just needed to cover the rising cost of the hot dogs and soda. Derek stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for any escape route. It was not a real business. It was just a neighborhood get-together. It was real enough to bring in over $700 a weekend in pure profit. I snapped sharply. But honestly, that is just local municipal code enforcement. That is just civil financial penalties. You can survive that. I picked up the heavy manila envelope with the red state seal. I did not hand it to Harrison. I held it up high for Derek, Richard, and Brenda to see clearly. You called me a paper-pushing loser, Derek. You and your father have spent 4 long years openly mocking my state job, mocking my salary, and treating me like a complete idiot because I do not sit at the Thanksgiving dinner table and brag about my fake hustle. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out my heavy brass badge and leather state credentials. I threw them aggressively onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy, undeniable, metallic thud that echoed in the silent room. I am a senior financial fraud investigator for the State Department of Revenue, I said, letting the sheer weight of the title hang in the quiet room. I actively investigate complex corporate embezzlement, severe tax evasion, and highly organized financial crime. Richard completely stopped breathing. He stared at the shining brass badge as if it were alive, ticking grenades sitting on the table. I leaned forward, looking dead into Derek's utterly terrified eyes. When I looked through your public Venmo history to see exactly how much cash you illegally scammed off my pool, I noticed a very disturbing pattern. I noticed you were frequently transferring large, structured sums of money to a limited liability company called Apex Solutions. You were deliberately funneling clean money to a registered agent named Silas. Derek physically recoiled, pressing his back deep into the expensive leather sofa. He started shaking uncontrollably, his hands trembling. How do you know that name?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Because Silas is the primary criminal target of a multimillion-dollar federal money laundering and tax evasion case that my department has been building for 6 grueling months in coordination with federal prosecutors," I said, leaning in so close he could feel the cold certainty radiating from me. "You were not just running a fake summer camp to make rent, Derek. You were actively acting as a cash mule for a felony federal money laundering ring. You knowingly mixed the illicit cash you made off my private property with whatever dirty street money Silas handed you, and you purposefully washed it through his real estate shell company to hide it." The profound silence that followed was absolute. It was the terrifying sound of a man's entire life completely evaporating into thin air. "You are lying," Derek choked out, his voice cracking violently, tears springing to his eyes. "I swear to God, I did not know what he was doing. Silas just said he could help me hide some extra cash so my ex-wife and her aggressive lawyer would not find it during the custody modification for child support. I swear I did not know it was a federal crime." "Ignorance of the law is never a valid defense," Harrison interjected, his voice dripping with profound, unadulterated disgust. "You actively engaged in money laundering to hide assets to avoid financially supporting your own flesh and blood children? You are an absolute, irredeemable disgrace to this entire family." I firmly tapped the sealed manila envelope. "This envelope contains all your Venmo logs, your handwritten party ledger, and your entire transaction history with Apex Solutions. Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I am walking into my director's office, and I am officially handing this file over. It will be immediately forwarded to the IRS and the federal prosecutor handling the Silas case. They are going to aggressively audit every single dime you have ever touched in your adult life. They will legally freeze all your bank accounts. And when Silas inevitably goes down, he will absolutely sell out his low-level mules like you to get a favorable plea deal." "Julian, please," Derek screamed, suddenly throwing his entire body off the sofa and dropping heavily to his knees on the intricate Persian rug. The arrogant, smug, untouchable bully was completely gone. He was crying hysterically, his face red, splotchy, and pathetic. "Please, man, I will go to federal prison. I cannot survive in prison. I will pay for the pool. I will take out a predatory loan. I will do anything you want. Please, I am begging you, do not give them the file. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I looked down at Derek groveling on the floor at my feet, his tears staining the expensive rug. I felt absolutely zero pity. None. For 4 long years of blatant disrespect, for years of silently cleaning up his garbage, for years of being publicly called a mooch, a beggar, and a pathetic leech, this was the ultimate moment of absolute clarity and vindication. You wrote in your little note that you wanted to teach me a lesson, I said softly, looking down at his pathetic, trembling form. You specifically wrote that you wanted me to know how it feels to have something I care about taken away. Well, Derek, lesson fully learned. Now I am teaching you yours. The official files go directly to the director tomorrow morning. You better find yourself a very, very good criminal defense lawyer. You are going to need one. I turned completely away from him, dismissing him entirely, and looked directly at Richard. My father-in-law was exceptionally pale, sweating profusely through his tight, expensive golf shirt. The loud, overbearing patriarch who loved to aggressively bully everyone in his path was suddenly completely, utterly powerless. He looked over at Rebecca, sheer, unadulterated panic etched deeply into his aging face. "Rebecca, honey," Richard pleaded, his voice trembling violently, completely devoid of its usual booming authority. "Talk to your husband, please. He cannot do this to your brother. It is family. We can fix this mess privately. Put the pool repairs on your high-limit credit card. We will pay you back every single cent. I swear to God on my life. We just desperately need to keep the cops and the federal IRS out of this. If the feds get involved, it will ruin us." I absolutely did not let Rebecca answer. I stepped directly into his line of sight, blocking his manipulative view of my wife. I reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out the printed credit card statement from 2 summers ago, the highlighted charge for the $400 camping tent. I walked purposefully over to Richard and shoved the paper directly against his chest. "You mean exactly like you solemnly promised to pay her back for this?" I demanded, my voice echoing powerfully off the high vaulted ceilings. "The $400 camping tent you manipulated and forced your own daughter to buy with my hard-earned salary, just so you could give it to your deadbeat, unemployed son to make him look like a good father? The exact same tent you viciously mocked me for asking to borrow just a few weeks ago." Richard stumbled backward, clumsily clutching the paper statement, his eyes darting frantically. That was completely different, Julian. I was just a little short on liquid cash that month. I fully intended to pay her back. It was an oversight. Harrison stood up from his heavy leather chair. The former state judge looked at his younger brother with a terrifying mixture of immense rage and absolute, unfiltered contempt. "You stole from your own daughter, Richard," Harrison said, his voice completely lethal, cutting through the room like a physical blade. "You maliciously manipulated her into stealing from her devoted husband just to fund Derek's endless, pathetic delusions of grandeur. You have spent your entire adult life puffing out your chest, aggressively pretending to be a successful, self-made man, while acting like a parasitic leech on absolutely anyone foolish enough to let you get close." "Harrison, please," Brenda sobbed loudly, burying her face completely in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. "Do not say these horrible things. We are a family. We have to stick together." "Not anymore, Brenda," Harrison snapped, completely devoid of sympathy. He pointed a firm, unwavering finger directly at Richard's sweating face. "Listen to me very carefully, Richard. You have always banked entirely on getting a massive financial payout from the family inheritance when our mother's trust finally pays out next year. You leased that ridiculous Porsche based on that assumption. As the sole legal executor of that trust, I am telling you right now to your face, I am legally restructuring the entire document tomorrow morning with my attorneys. You and Derek are being cut out completely. Permanently. Every single dime that would have gone to fund your fake lifestyle is going directly into a locked, untouchable college fund trust for Dylan and Mason. You will not see a single solitary penny of this family's money ever again. Richard let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, clutching his chest tightly as if he were actually having a massive heart attack. He collapsed heavily into a nearby chair, his face buried deep in his hands. The massive inheritance, the ultimate trump card he always held over everyone's head to demand unearned respect, was completely gone in a matter of seconds. He was financially ruined, destined to drown in the debt he had accrued trying to look wealthy. I picked up my briefcase, snapped the brass locks shut, and straightened my blazer. "This meeting is officially over," I announced to the room. I looked at Richard, Brenda, and the sobbing mess that was Derek. "None of you will ever step foot on my real estate again. If you call my phone, I will legally log it as severe harassment. If you come anywhere near my house, you will be aggressively arrested for trespassing. Enjoy the federal audits." I turned sharply and walked out of the study. I did not look back to see if Rebecca was following me. I walked out the heavy front doors, marched down the stone steps, and stood by my car, breathing in the fresh, clean air. A minute later, the heavy front door opened, and Rebecca ran out. She was crying so incredibly hard she could barely catch her breath. She practically collapsed against the side of the car, grabbing my arm with desperate strength. "Julian," she gasped, her voice entirely broken and raw. "I am so incredibly sorry. Oh my God. I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not know how truly bad they were. I was so incredibly blind. Please, please do not leave me. I will do whatever it takes. We can go to intensive counseling. I will cut them off completely, I promise. Just please, do not file for divorce." I looked down at her. For the first time in our long 8-year marriage, she had actually stood firmly by my side instead of desperately shielding her toxic family. The terrifying spell Richard had held over her since childhood was finally, permanently broken. She saw them for the manipulative parasites they truly were. "Get in the car, Rebecca," I said quietly, unlocking the doors. "We have a massive amount of things to talk about." The legal and social fallout over the next 3 months was absolute and devastatingly comprehensive. True to my word, I handed the massive evidence file over to my director the very next morning. The state tax board and the federal IRS descended on Derek like a pack of starving vultures. When the heavily armed federal investigators showed up at the logistics company where Derek was working his newest hustle, he was fired on the spot by a terrified manager. The company absolutely did not want any association with a highly publicized federal money laundering probe. The IRS immediately froze all his bank accounts pending a full, exhaustive audit of his unreported income. Because his accounts were entirely frozen, he could not make his monthly rent payment. He could not pay his predatory truck loan. His beloved, oversized, lifted pickup truck was unceremoniously repossessed in the middle of the night by a tow company. He was violently forced to move into a tiny, run-down, roach-infested studio apartment on the absolute worst side of town. But the most brutal, life-altering consequence came directly from his ex-wife. When she found out Derek was facing potential felony federal indictments for his deep involvement with Apex Solutions, she did not hesitate for a single second. She hired a highly aggressive, ruthless family lawyer and filed an emergency petition in family court for full, undivided custody of Dylan and Mason. The family court judge granted the petition immediately, citing Derek's impending, massive legal battles and his highly unstable, dangerous living situation. Derek lost the right to see his own kids without strictly supervised visitation. The money he had greedily scammed from my backyard pool parties was entirely eaten up by the massive retainer for his overworked, exhausted public defender. The social consequences in my quiet suburban neighborhood were just as incredibly satisfying. Word travels extremely fast in the suburbs. Gregory, the strict HOA president, and Colin, the annoying, opportunistic neighbor who used to drink all my expensive beer at Derek's obnoxious parties, found out about the felony charges. More importantly, They finally found out what I actually did for a living. Suddenly, the guys who used to actively ignore me or quietly mock me were bending over backward to be my best friend. Colin actually walked over to my fence one sunny Saturday afternoon, holding a very expensive bottle of imported wine. "Hey, Julian," Colin called out loudly, leaning heavily over the wooden fence with a highly forced, overly friendly, desperate smile. "Man, I heard all about what happened with Derek. That guy was always a completely bad egg. Good thing you got rid of him, right? Listen, I am hosting a massive barbecue next weekend. Some very high-end corporate clients will be there. I would absolutely love for a highly respected state investigator of your caliber to drop by. We could talk some serious business." I looked at Colin over the rim of my sunglasses. I vividly remembered him loudly laughing when Derek called me a pathetic tightwad last summer while holding one of my beers. "I do not drink wine, Colin," I said flatly, not bothering to get up from my comfortable lounge chair. "And I absolutely do not socialize with people who enthusiastically participated in an unlicensed, illegal commercial operation in my private backyard. Have a good barbecue." I watched the incredibly fake smile fall right off his face as he awkwardly, silently backed away from the fence, clutching his bottle of wine. It felt absolutely incredible to finally establish strict, unyielding boundaries and watch people instantly respect them out of pure, unadulterated fear and respect. But amidst all the righteous, highly satisfying vengeance, there was one tragic casualty I had not fully anticipated. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when my cell phone rang. I did not immediately recognize the number on the caller ID, but I answered it anyway. "Hello, Uncle Julian?" a small, incredibly trembling voice said through the speaker. I immediately sat up straight in my chair, my heart dropping. "Dylan?" "Yeah, it is me." My 9-year-old nephew sniffled loudly. He sounded like he had been crying alone in his room for hours. "Mom said I could call you on her phone. Uncle Julian, my dad says we can never, ever go swimming at your house again. He said you are an evil man and you completely ruined his life. Are you really mad at me and Mason? Did we do something wrong to make you hate us?" My heart completely shattered into a million pieces inside my chest. These two little boys were entirely innocent. They were tragic collateral damage in a vicious, ego-driven war their father had started out of pure entitlement and spite. They did not understand complex tax fraud, federal money laundering, or malicious property damage. They just knew their absolute favorite summer activity was permanently gone. And their father, true to his incredibly cowardly, manipulative nature, was actively blaming me to his own children. "Dylan, buddy, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice softening completely, stripping away all the investigative hardness. "You and Mason did absolutely nothing wrong. You are incredibly good boys. Your dad and I had a very serious disagreement about how adults should respect each other's property and follow the rules. He made some very, very bad choices and he has to face the adult consequences for those choices. But I am not mad at you. I will never, ever be mad at you. But we cannot swim anymore?" he asked, his voice breaking into a quiet sob. I closed my eyes tightly, taking a deep, ragged breath. Derek deserved to suffer. He deserved absolutely everything terrible happening to him right now. But a genuinely good man does not maliciously punish innocent children for the massive sins of their father. "Let me talk to your mom for a minute," I said. His ex-wife got on the phone. We talked intensely for 20 minutes. I explained clearly that while Derek was permanently, legally banned from my real estate, I did not want the kids to suffer the consequences of his actions. I made her a very specific offer. That following Saturday morning, I pulled my clean SUV up to the cracked curb of Derek's rundown, depressing apartment building. The strict custody agreement stated Derek had closely supervised visitation for exactly 2 hours on Saturday mornings. His ex-wife had specifically arranged for the pickup to happen during his narrow window, specifically so he could watch it happen. Dylan and Mason ran out the peeling front door wearing their bright swim trunks, carrying brightly colored beach towels. They practically tackled me in the cracked driveway, hugging my legs tightly. "Ready to go, guys?" I asked, smiling down at their excited faces. "We are going to the massive indoor community pool across town today. The huge one with the giant water slides." "Yep," they cheered loudly, scrambling excitedly into the back seat of my car. I closed their doors securely and looked up. Derek was standing alone on the rusted second-floor balcony of his apartment complex. He looked absolutely terrible. He was unshaven, wearing a heavily stained t-shirt, his face deeply sunken, pale, and thoroughly exhausted. He gripped the rusted metal railing, staring down at me with a look of pure, impotent, agonizing rage. He could not say a single word. If he caused a loud scene, it would be immediately reported to the aggressive family court judge, and he would completely lose his remaining visitation rights entirely. I did not gloat. I did not smile triumphantly. I just looked him dead in the eye, gave a single, slow, deliberate nod, and got into my car. I drove away, taking his precious children to do the one thing he could no longer financially or legally provide for them. A safe, incredibly happy afternoon. I took that remaining power right out of his hands. Forever. It is late evening now. I am sitting quietly on my back patio. The crisp, cool October air has finally broken the oppressive summer heat. The bright underwater LED lights of my newly rebuilt pool are casting a beautiful, rippling blue glow against the side of the house. The water is perfectly, peacefully still. The insurance company paid out the massive claim with lightning speed once their aggressive subrogation lawyers saw Derek's signed confession note. I hired Marcus to completely rebuild the pool, and I used some of my own carefully saved money to heavily upgrade it. The new heavy vinyl liner is a deep, sparkling midnight blue. The concrete deck was beautifully expanded, the heavy cedar planters were fully replaced, and I had a state-of-the-art, high-definition security system installed with cameras covering every single inch of the perimeter. It is finally, truly, my sanctuary. The heavy sliding glass door opens smoothly, and Rebecca steps out. She is carrying 2 large mugs of hot, steaming coffee. She hands one to me and sits down in the comfortable chair next to mine. Rebecca is a completely different person now. The absolute shock of that Sunday meeting, the harsh reality of her father's blatant theft, and her brother's severe criminal behavior finally broke the toxic, generational conditioning she had lived under her entire life. She immediately started going to intensive therapy twice a week. She permanently changed her phone number so Richard and Brenda could not constantly contact her with their endless, manipulative guilt trips regarding the inheritance they lost. She finally realized that a true, lasting marriage requires 2 dedicated people fiercely protecting each other against the outside world, not one person constantly sacrificing the other to maintain a fake, highly toxic peace. It has absolutely not been easy, and we still have a massive amount of hard work to do. But for the very first time in 8 long years, I actually feel like I have a loyal wife who truly has my back. We survived this massive storm because the cancer was finally surgically cut out of our lives. I take a long sip of the hot coffee, looking out over the calm, glowing water. In the organized garage, neatly packed away in its carrying case, is the $400 camping tent. The exact tent that started this entire, unbelievable cascade of destruction. We have used it 3 separate times since the disastrous Yellowstone trip. We go camping just the 2 of us, driving far away from cell phone service and toxic family drama. That tent has become a powerful symbol for me. It is a constant reminder that I do not have to ask absolutely anyone for permission to live my own life. It is a permanent reminder of my own fierce independence. People often heavily confuse kindness with weakness. They mistakenly think that if a man is quiet, if he works a steady, respectable job, pays his taxes on time, and actively avoids unnecessary conflict, he is a pushover. Derek genuinely thought I was a pushover. Richard truly thought I was a coward. They did not understand that the quietest men are often the ones meticulously building the absolute strongest foundations. And when you foolishly try to crack that foundation, you do not find soft dirt. You find solid, unbreakable steel. I used to foolishly think that being the bigger person meant constantly letting things slide. I mistakenly thought swallowing my valid anger and quietly cleaning up the mess was the noble, mature thing to do. But I learned a very hard, unforgettable lesson this summer. Being a good man absolutely does not mean letting people use you as a doormat. True goodness, true fierce protection of your family and your hard-earned peace, requires you to have incredibly sharp teeth. You do not have to aggressively bite everyone you meet, but you must be absolutely, completely willing to tear someone apart if they actively threaten what you have built. Derek aggressively wanted to teach me a lesson about being a worthless leech. Instead, I gave him an unforgettable, life-ruining masterclass on the devastating, permanent consequences of waking up a sleeping bear. My yard is clean, my pool is pristine, and my life is finally my own. Thank you for sticking around and actively listening to my long story. I know it was a long, heavy one, but sharing it helps me properly process everything that happened. I hope this deeply resonated with you in some meaningful way. We all have those highly toxic people in our lives who aggressively push boundaries, who take and take until there is absolutely nothing left. Have you ever faced something incredibly similar with your own family? Have you ever had to firmly stand up to a toxic family member and establish a boundary that completely changed everything? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.